There are places that offer no shelter. There are paths that weren't made for driving, but for testing. Autumn Xinji Province, China. A man is chained to a rock face. Below him, hundreds of meters of absolute emptiness. Ahead, only narrow wooden planks fastened directly to the mountainside. A mistake here doesn't mean slipping, it means disappearing. This path has existed for centuries, and thousands have already crossed it, knowing there was no guarantee of return. The question was never whether they would make it to the other side. The question was always, what were they willing to lose in order to continue? Welcome to Mount What, the mountain that promises no protection, only truth. In the heart of ancient China, long before cameras, tourist trails, or security equipment, emperors, monks, and hermits walked toward Huashan, driven by something that couldn't be explained with simple words. They weren't seeking landscapes. They were seeking disruption. Huashan is known as the Western Mountain, one of the 5 sacred mountains of Taoism. And, in Chinese cosmology, the West never symbolized the end. It symbolized transition, the moment when something needs to die so that something else can exist. While the East represents birth and the South expansion, the West is the territory of return, of the closing of cycles, of the abandonment of the ego. Therefore, climbing Huashan never meant reaching a physical summit. It meant accepting an inner farewell. Historical records show that since at least the Han Dynasty, this mountain was already considered a place separate from the common world. Their isolation was not punishment, it was a method. Monks and hermits lived for years in caves, suspended temples, and platforms carved into the rock. The more inaccessible the place, Tay believed, the less interference from the human world. Huashan didn't welcome selected. But what exactly were they looking for there? Why risk your life in an environment where mistakes don't offer second chances? The answer lies at the heart of Taoism, inner alchemy. Unlike the Western idea of alchemy here, the goal was not to transform metals into gold, but to transform the self, fear into presence, attachment into emptiness, consciousness into clarity. Huashan functioned like a spiritual furnace. The mountain didn't teach with words, it taught with risk. Ancient texts speak of the presence of Shuddati, the great emperor of the Western Peak, a deity associated not with passive protection, but with testing. Before ascending, emperors made offerings at the great temple at the foot of the mountain, built in 134 BC. It was the last place where human power still held any relevance. Above him, there was no hierarchy, only stone, wind, and silence. And it was in this silence that many disappeared, not as an escape from life, but as a plunge so deep that the ordinary world ceased to make sense. Before we continue, it's worth pausing. Could you remain in complete isolation for years, knowing there might be no return? Write that in the comment. And if this kind of question resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, because here we don't just talk about places, we talk about limits. Huashan doesn't have a single summit. It's formed by 5 distinct peaks, arranged almost like a natural mountain. For Taoism, this was never a geographical coincidence. It was symbolic language. The North Peak acts as a gateway. It's where the pilgrim understands that they can still give up, and that, if they continue, there's no guarantee they'll be the same upon descending. The East Peak is linked to the sunrise. There, monks meditated at dawn, seeking the first glimpse of clarity. It is the moment when one realizes that the ascent is not external. But the real confrontation happens on the South Peak, the highest, the most dangerous, narrow trails, vertical cliffs, platforms suspended in the void. Here Taoism teaches something brutal. To continue, one must accept that control is an illusion. Taoist symbolizes return, not a physical return, but an inner one, infrequently visited, reserved for advanced practitioners. It represents integration and silence. There is no glory there, only understanding. At its center, the central peak acts as an axis, harmony between heaven, earth, and humankind. The Tao, and scattered across these peaks, are temples that seem to defy all human logic, built in nearly inaccessible locations, not to attract worshippers, but to filter out those who were truly willing to come. This wasn't extreme architecture. It was theology in stone. Before the final climb, everyone passed through the Jade Fountain Temple. There, purifications, fasts, and silent prayers took place. After that point, there were no guarantees. Everything you were was left behind. Then comes the abyss, the plank hike, wooden planks attached to the rock face, supported by chains, over an absolute void. Today it's called one of the most dangerous trails in the world, but originally, it was never an attraction. It was a ritual. These paths existed to reach hermits, meditation spots, and platforms for spiritual observation. They were traversed by those who consciously accepted the risk. In Taoism, fear is not an enemy. It is a gateway. Over the abyss, the body goes into high alert. The future disappears. The past loses meaning. Only the present remains, a state that Taoist texts describe as total alignment with the Tao. The abyss is not a flaw in the mountain, a lesson. It represents impermanence, the fragility of existence, and the lie of control. Those who crossed without fighting their fear, those who accepted the possibility of falling, underwent a symbolic death. And only after this inner death did the climb make sense. There were falls, there were deaths, but never a spectacle. Silence was part of the process. The choice was individual. Huashan didn't promise protection. He promised truth. And it is precisely here that a conflict arises that is difficult to ignore. If Huashan truly functions solely as an extreme physical challenge, why do so many ancient records insist on describing it as something more than a mountain? Why did emperors invest resources, rituals, and decades of devotion in a place where there were no riches, cities, or military advantage? Modern science explains Huashan as a geological phenomena: ancient granite rocks, tectonic faults, extreme vertical erosion, all rational, all measurable. But this explanation only answers how the mountain was formed. For centuries, people willing to disappear into it. Records from the Thames dynasty mention monks who ascended Huashan to perform practices of absolute isolation, called retreats, without a defined return. There was no date to descend. There was no promise of survival. The simple act of ascending was already considered a public renunciation of the ordinary world. Some texts report that these practitioners spent months, sometimes years, without direct human contact. They ate minimally. They slept little. And, according to ancient descriptions, they entered prolonged states of mental silence, where thoughts seemed to dissolve. For modern science, this can be interpreted as extreme effects of isolation, altitude, and sensory deprivation. For Taoism, that was precisely the goal. Herein lies the greatest paradox of Huashan. The same place that threatens the body seems to liberate the mind. There are accounts from 11th and 12th century Chinese scholars stating that Huashan reduces man to the essential. No distractions, no social noisy, no constructed identity, just breath, risk, and awareness. As if the mountain acted as a brutal filter, everything superfluous falls into the abyss. And perhaps that's why Huashan has never been a center of mass pilgrimage like other sacred sites. It doesn't welcome crowds. It demands intention. It demands choice. It demands responsibility. While other temples promise spiritual comfort, Huashan offers confrontation. While other mountains elevate through contemplation, Huashan elevates through the constant tension between life and downfall. It is a spirituality without anesthesia. Some modern researchers propose neurological hypotheses for the experiences reported there. Altered states of consciousness induced by extreme risk, absolute focus induced by fear, temporary dissolution of the ego as a survival response. All of this is possible, but none of these hypotheses explains why different people in different eras, different cultures, and completely different contexts describe such similar sensations. Perhaps because Huashan is not just a physical location, perhaps it's a process that begins when the path narrows, when the body trembles, when the mind tries to escape, and when, finally, there is nowhere else to go except inward. At this point, the mountain ceases to be a backdrop and becomes a mirror. It doesn't teach new ideas. It removes all the old ones, and what remains is what truly exists. And what happened to those who crossed? Taoist legends speak of so-called immortals not as beings eternally trapped in the body, but as humans who have transcended the fear of death. Huashan appears repeatedly as a place of passage. Some went up and never came down again. They were last seen walking through the mist, leaving only simple objects behind, not as an escape, but as a return to the natural flow. The mountain is famous for its seas of dense clouds. For Taoism, this teaches that reality is never fully revealed. Absolute clarity is an illusion. Truth shows itself in fragments. When the mist covers Huashan, it's not the mountain that disappears, it's the world. To this day, visitors report a dilation of time, a profound inner silence, and a temporary loss of their sense of identity. Huashan demands presence, not through beauty, but through intensity. Perhaps Huashan doesn't transform those who ascend it. Perhaps it merely reveals. Not all paths lead to a summit. Some lead to a limit, and sometimes it is there that the soul finds space to exist. Huashan doesn't ask if you're strong. It asks if you're ready to disappear, even if, just for a moment, and come back a changed person. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many mountains you climb. What matters is how many versions of yourself you left behind along the way. This was another episode of Sacred Roots. If you've made it this far, comment. Would you have the courage to walk to the edge of the abyss? And what do you think you would have to leave behind? Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey through the most mysterious and sacred places on our planet. Here, we don't show the world. We reveal what he's hiding.